It was magical, if I can use that term. It reminded me very powerfully that there is more.
What and who we are, it happened. It was energy exchanged. The labels, different sectors of society, global, religion, belief, whatever you want to say, we'll call it something different.
The only thing that I can define as truth is oneness.
Hello there. Australian award-winning filmmaker Bill Bennett has been a fairly frequent visitor to the channel over the last couple of years. He's become quite a good friend, even though he lives on the other side of the world. He visited us recently and I gave him the chance to actually try a bit of dowsing. That's fairly amusing. We talk about that in a second, you'll see. The reason I wanted to talk this time to Bill, and we had this conversation a few months ago now, but the reason I wanted to talk to him was I wanted to understand more about his experience of walking the Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage route. Now he's written about that and he's made the film about it, hugely successful film, The Way, My Way. Both of the book and the film are called that. Now look, what was fascinating for me was what Bill had described in previous conversations about the remarkable experiences that can happen when people are doing pilgrimage, especially along that route. Now to me, some of the remarkableness sounded like it could be the sort of experience that people encounter as they open up spiritually with sacred intent in areas that are positively affected by earth energy. And in the Dowsing community, we regard pilgrimage routes as lines of earth energy. They are given focused intent by the people walking along the lines. Now, stay with me. This conversation is a fairly long one. Maybe you'll want to split it yourselves into a few sessions. And you will find that it is a discussion. It is not an interview. And there is a fair amount of me talking about earth energy. So if you can get past that, please do enjoy this conversation that I had with Bill Bennett about earth energy and pilgrimage. Tell you what, we are recording as a basic framework. What I'd like to do, see how you feel with this. I'd like to talk a little bit about The Way, My Way. We'll talk about that because the last time we spoke about that, you were just at the point of it was going to have its first public viewing, I think. So a little while ago. I want to talk about your feelings about pilgrimage generally, which we can do in reference to that, and specifically in what you're finding and what your views are about earth energy and this sort of subtle energy that we as human beings seem to be a part of, right? And when you visited us here, you had a chance to pick up a dowsing rod and we had a little bit of a dowsing session, a bit of a practice session out here in front of the house. How did that sit or land with you as a process or a concept?
It was magical, if I can use that term. It reminded me very powerfully that there is more to our life than we're aware of. There are forces at play that we are not consciously aware of that must impact our lives and our thoughts, in profound ways. I've done a little bit of the yes-no pendulum stuff in the past, and I've always been quite fascinated by that, but haven't, to be quite frank, given it much deeper thought. What you did with me, and the way you directed me, and the way you amplified my energy by putting your hand on my shoulder, I think, that was extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. We live in a world that is an energetic world and which science hasn't fully acknowledged. And my film, PGS Intuition is Your Personal Guidance System, its main thrust is that we have an energetic system that operates through us that is as legitimate as any physical, corporeal functioning system like our respiratory system, our circulatory system, our immune system, and so forth. All of those are physical, and science acknowledges them because they can see it and measure it and so forth. But what I propose in that film is that we have an energetic system that is as legitimate as all of those. And I call it a personal guidance system. And the reason I call it that is because I believe this system has two functions. One is to keep us alive, and the second is to guide us through life on the path that we were born to take. All this comes down to purpose. It all feeds into purpose. I believe that we are born to fulfill a purpose, but we can't fulfill that purpose if we're dead. And so the number one function of our intuitive guidance system is to keep us alive so that we can fulfill our purpose. The second one, keeping us on our path, is keeping us on that track, that road, that roadmap, that blueprint that we were born with to fulfill our purpose. Purpose then leads into something that I'm becoming more and more interested in, and that is the notion of service. Our purpose should be to serve in some form. And this leads circuitously into pilgrimage. And we can talk about this later, but I think the notion of pilgrimage has been somewhat corrupted.
Why do you think it's been corrupted?
I see people who walk pilgrimages, they do the Camino 2, 3, 4 times a year, or they do it once every year. Now, I'm not going to place judgment on that at all, because I hope that one of the things that I've learned from the Caminos that I've done is to not judge. But I come back to Paul Coelho, the fellow who wrote The Alchemist, one of the acknowledged sort of classic spiritual texts of our modern times. Sold over 100 million copies. Now, that was his second book. The first book was called Pilgrimage. He walked the Camino. And then he wrote this book. And he said later that he could not have written The Alchemist had he not walked the Camino. Now, here is somebody who didn't walk the Camino 3 or 4 times a year. He didn't walk every year for 12 years or something and notched each Camino up on his belt. He walked the Camino to work out what was important in his life. And then he put that into service by writing a book that has had a profound impact on the rest of the world. Now, this to me is what I see as being, for me anyway, the purpose of walking a Camino. It's not the social factor. It's not measuring your spirituality by the number of Caminos you've walked or how far you've gone. For me, it's about deciding who you are, who you really are, and then putting that into service in some form that can help other people.
It feels completely in line with how I would perceive it. You took the Camino in order to make a fundamental change to you. And this is what we talked about last time when we were talking about the film and the book. And clearly it did have. But you must have been on a wave of change leading up to that decision to say, right, I'm going to walk the Camino.
Looking back on it now, I don't feel as though I did do the walk for that reason. I had become stuck, certainly. And by stuck, I mean I'd been trying to make this film on intuition for quite some time. I hadn't been able to break through, and I realized that there were some internal blockages. And when I decided to walk the Camino, I decided to dedicate my walk to this film that I wished to make. And in doing that, I decided to do the walk intuitively, which was terrifying for me because, I'm somebody who relishes forward planning and so forth. I love planning how to plan.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I've recently sort of come to the belief that um, it's a nonsense to think that walking for 30 days, 40 days, whatever it is, 500 miles, 800 kilometers or less, and thinking that at the end of it, you're going to be a different person. I don't believe that happens. I believe that you go through certain dark nights of the soul, if you like, certain crises, recalibration. Um, but I don't think that at the end of that walk, you are necessarily a fundamentally different person. What I think happens is that the Camino gives you permission to change. It gives you a preview, if you like, of what change can mean in your life. And the hard part comes when you come back from the Camino, is to keep being a pilgrim. Because when you come back, you're faced with all of the challenges and the hardships and the struggles and the self-doubt and all of those things that presumably plagued you beforehand. But if you can keep in mind what you experienced, what you learned, what you felt during your walk, then you have a chance of then instituting fundamental change. To use a film industry term, the Camino gives you the opportunity to pre-vis your changed life, to pre-visualize your changed life. When you get home, the hard work starts. Somebody cuts in front of you on the road. Your temptation is to jam your hand on the horn, and curse and so forth. Somebody pushed ahead of you in the queue at the post office. You're tempted to tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, mate, come on." All of these sort of things. And then you've got to ask yourself, what would a pilgrim do? What I ask myself is, if I am surrounded by angels, what would the angels think if I responded this way? If I spoke to this person this way? How would my angels feel about that? And that to me I found is a very, very grounding thing. I think about that.
I think we may have touched on that when we first spoke in our first conversation about intuition, how it can be for some people taken as, it's like a guilt thing. So it's like, oh, well, I won't do that because blah, blah, blah. But it's not really what you're saying. You're saying you do it from that energy of love that they exhibit.
It's being accountable. It's being accountable to a higher realm.
Accountable tends to feel, this is actually interesting because it's echoing what we said last time when I introduced the concept that I think about those higher realms, the energies, the personalities that are, we always point up there, they're not up there, we know that, but those aspects of of reality that are present and do have an influence on us as human beings. I used to use the term the management. And you said, well, that sounds very authoritarian. I don't think I like that very much, was the kind of sentiment that you were coming across. It was an interesting viewpoint, which I thought, oh, that's interesting. And the reason that I used the term the management was because my mentor, Hamish Miller, used it. And he used it in a very specific context as being representative of those beings that he met when he had his near-death experience. So when I used the management, I was using it kind of in homage to Hamish, fantastic guy, and also recognizing his humor. So I've since changed. I don't use the word the management after our conversation, because I now to refer to it as the higher beings, which is, to me, that's fine. That's the wordage, but we're not accountable to, as far as I'm concerned, we're not accountable to the higher beings. We are absolutely intimately connected into the overall sphere of energy that ranges from the highest of the high down to the lowest of the low, and we are a part of that. And what we do, we're accountable to ourselves by actually playing and being responsible for our own role within that spectrum of energies.
From what I've read and from what I've heard and from what I've learned, after you die, there is a period where you go into a place between souls where you review your life.
Mm.
And you review all the good things and all the bad things. Sometimes it could just be an offhand comment. Sometimes it could be a genuine act of kindness and generosity, or the reverse. And so, and from what I understand, there's no judgment in this. There's no
Exactly.
scolding. There's no punishment.
Exactly.
There's no weighing of the scales, as
Yeah.
in the Egyptian philosophy and so forth. But there is a review.
Mm.
And you are accountable in that review for your actions.
To yourself.
Yeah.
Your own awareness. Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
you are accountable to your own awareness, not to, because again, I think the hardest part of all of this for anybody is to actually remove the concept of separation. When we're in that energy of the soul self doing that review, we are, if we are encountering a being, it is a reflection of us. Highly reactive, highly instantly manifest. Whereas the fundamental difference that we have down here in our nursery that we're learning in is that the manifesting process from what is within, you'll recognize this from Paul Selig anyway, what is within is constantly being created without in the moment, but that manifesting process is a much longer linear timescale than what we have when we're in that soul energy. So it's all self. Now, that's not to say that it's the human egotistic self, far from it. If we use the word consciousness in a very broad context, but saying that the process of being aware is consciousness, then consciousness is always looking to, as we said before, looking to ask that question, why? And therefore, when we manifest as a human being, we have purpose because we're trying to explore that and also develop as a soul energy to be able to go up to the next level as though it were a game. But, and then the responsibilities at that level, responsibilities are different to those that we have at this level. There is nobody that we're responsible to or for except for ourselves. But having said that, I'm not going to go doing weird things if they're going to upset my wife, for example, because that isn't fair. And that's the whole point of what you're saying, is that how we behave is fundamentally important. And that is reflected in our purpose and the life that we're leading.
I was brought up an Anglican. I went to an Anglican church school. But when I was about 16 years old, my parents took me to Japan. My sister was working in Japan at the time, and we visited her. And the first night in Japan, in a hotel in Tokyo, I opened up the drawer, the bedside table drawer, and inside was this small black book with a cloth cover. And it had on it, strangely, the Buddhist Bible. Anyway, so at the age of 16, I sat down and read this book. I read it cover to cover. It had such a profound effect on me that I went down into the lobby and I bought my own copy. And I still have it. And that started me at the age of 16 on a path of religious inquiry or spiritual inquiry that I continue to this day. My problem with Christianity in general, basically, is it operates on a carrot and stick basis. If you hold the carrot out in front of you and you live a righteous, pure life, and you go to heaven. If you don't, you get the cane. I couldn't come at that. I couldn't believe that a God could be so punitive or so manipulative. But I moved away from Buddhism when I really started to think deeply about detachment and about how that robs you of emotion. I couldn't come at the Buddhist notion of love because really there's no greater attachment than love. But if you follow through with the Buddhist thought, not by no means a Buddhist scholar, you wouldn't ever fall in love because that's the ultimate of attachment.
Right.
I sort of became a free floater. I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't a Buddhist. Hinduism was a little bit too animistic for me. And so I've ended up where I've ended up. Talking about accountability just for a second, it reminded me of a moment that I had in New Delhi. I was staying in a hotel and I started to realize there was a lot of security in the hotel, like a lot of security. And I figured that the only reason for it was that possibly the Dalai Lama was staying in the same hotel. It turned out he was. And the security all sort of moved to the front entrance, and it became obvious that the Dalai Lama was going to leave the hotel and hop in his car. So I waited for him to come out. Anyway, he stepped up and I stepped forward and I introduced myself and I shook his hand. Now, here's the thing, Tim. It was as though the world stood still. When I shook his hand, there was this huge charge of electricity that came from him into me. It's like this, it was almost, I could have been bowled backwards off my feet. And he looked into my eyes, and I looked into his eyes, and he knew exactly who I was. It was like he was downloading my entire life story and my past lives as well. Now, in my mind, that lasted 5-7 minutes. In reality, it was probably 3 seconds, and then he moved on and he got in his car and drove away. But that electric feeling, that ecstatic feeling, stayed with me for a very long time. And so coming back to the whole thing about angelic presence, how would you act if you were constantly in the presence of the Dalai Lama? You'd be a good boy.
The reason I'm pausing is I'm genuinely considering that, because, see, on a logical basis, I would think, well, okay, so Dalai Lama, yes, amazing being, amazing man, with incredible connection plugged in up there, great, brilliant, fantastic. But equally, if he has that awareness, he would know exactly how I behave, and I would behave as me. Why would I don't, as far as I know, do anything that is like so offensive that I wouldn't be behaving as I normally do with anybody else. With here, the Dalai Lama or anybody else. I mean, you give respect to guests, visitors, I mean, if he materialized now, I would, of course, be completely gobsmacked, but that's a different thing. That's not what you're saying. But see, personally, yes, I worry about what people think, right? I worry about what people think of me. That's just conditioning. And I struggle hard. I am struggling hard to just push that away, because that's not the truth. It doesn't matter. It is not of anything. Your experience with the Dalai Lama, and bloody well done for doing that, amazing, was far closer to the truth than anything else that can be perceived as a human being, because you're connecting into something that is not of this energy directly. And so therefore, this realm is built on interpretation. It's not built on truth. The only thing that's true is that we're alive, and that's what you connected to when you shook his hand. We are alive, we are present, we are now. Everything else is interpretation based on the subjective aspect of each individual. The objective compromise of the basal paradigm of belief, which is what we live in, which is complete crap. It's nonsense. This environment that we've built and we're conditioned into is nonsense, and it's time it was broken, which is what is happening. So that we actually reveal ourselves as our true selves, as human beings, which is ultimately creative beings connected into the divine. It's as simple as that. Gosh, you got me quite riled.
So why do you worry what people think of you?
Because it's conditioning. Every cell of my body has been conditioned to think, oh my God. It's not a therapy session, Bill, unless you want to go there.
I used to be the same. I could never speak in public. I was terrified of speaking in public. And then I made Facing Fear.
Right.
And I lost that. And how I lost that was by realizing that all fear is rooted in loss of something. And I determined that if I could come to terms with loss, then I could come to terms with fear. And that was a huge revelation to me, huge revelation. That one single revelation really did change my life. And strangely, I totally lost my fear of public speaking.
I used to suffer from, what do they call it? Selective mutism, right? When I was younger, right? Which is about the fact that no matter how much you want to say something, you cannot speak. So I used to have that. I didn't even know it was a thing until recently. So as a child, that's what I had, especially when being put under pressure to speak in class or something like that, right? And you look back at some of the early videos that I've done on my channel, and you will see a terrified, absolutely rabbit in the headlights type, person. Let's talk a little bit about the Camino and the film and the book, because I loved the film. I have to say, I loved it. It's such a beautiful, gentle, and I mean gentle in a really lovely, warm-hearted way. It's such a lovely movie. Look, I mean, I'm not, we're not in a film critic position here. What's going on? But it was a lovely bit of work.
Thank you for saying that. If this is the last movie I ever make, I'll be quite happy. And I do believe that. I'm very proud of the film. I'm proud of the fact that it's touched people's hearts. And I think the film has good values.
Oh, yeah. It is touching, and it is funny, as a lot of the comments reflect as well. What you were saying earlier on about the walk itself and pilgrimage itself, you see, to me, the act of pilgrimage, when undertaken with the recognition of how it can be a sacred act, is likely to be life-changing in itself, in a similar way to your spontaneous decision to shake the Dalai Lama's hand. Was don't know whether it was life-changing, but it certainly was an experience that you are carrying with you constantly, unconsciously. So where I'd like to go is to kind of talk a little bit about earth energy and the fields that we live in, because you see, what we find when we're doing house healing is that focused intention from human beings remains in a space. And therefore, when you've got a lot of people walking the same route, many of whom have the intention to connect into the higher realms, the higher vibrations, then that will remain in that line for until it's I don't know how long it'll be there for eternity. It's constantly there. It's present. So a question is, you were probably in too much pain to be aware of it as you were walking the line, but did the actual flow, the actual line, the route, when you got on the right route, did it actually feel any different at all to you, or were you not able to kind of tune into that?
Well, as you know, I've got this theory about this. I'm not drawn to doing long walks for the sake of doing a long walk.
Mm,
I am drawn to walking a pilgrimage route. I believe that, as I said before, we are energy.
mm,
If we walk with what I call spiritual intent, that energy creates an imprint on the path we walk. And it goes through your body, it goes through the chakras in your feet. It is a spiritual imprint that's planted. Now, when you've got a pilgrimage route like the Camino, which literally has had millions of people walk that path over a millennia, that spiritual imprint becomes very powerful. Now, energy is a two-way street. So you can imprint your spiritual intent on that path, and it goes into the aggregation of spiritual intention, spiritual reservoir, if you like. If someone walks that path receptive to that inherent reservoir of spiritual energy, then the reverse can happen. It can come up through them, and that's where transformation happens. That's where healing happens. That's where miracles happen. That's why you have 80, 90-year-old people walking the Camino, doing impossible things. It is an ebb and flow of energy. I don't believe that you have that same kind of effect on, say, the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest or whatever. There's no doubt that the mere fact that you are walking in nature is a spiritual act. There's no doubt about that at all. And you don't necessarily need to be on a path heading to Santiago de Compostela for you to have a spiritual experience in nature. But I think it's a deeper connection on a pilgrimage. I really do. And so to answer your question, yes, I did feel it. I can't remember, Tim, but did I talk about the treading on the star in the Burgos Cathedral with you last time?
You touched on it, but remind us of it.
Well, very basically, I'd had a lot of trouble getting into Burgos. It was about a third of the way through the walk. I was in a lot of pain. I had actually been to Burgos before when I was effectively doing a scout of the Camino before I actually walked it. And the Burgos Cathedral is regarded as one of the most beautiful cathedrals in all of Europe. I had a hard walk that day and I was in a lot of pain and I walked into the cathedral and this is a grand cathedral that has a number of chapels off the main kind of central area of the church. Um, and I was drawn to this one chapel in particular. I don't know why. It was almost on closing hour. And I walked into this chapel, which was sort of like this alcove, and there was a crypt towards the back of the chapel. And I walked up to the crypt and I stopped, and I realized that I had stopped on a star. The star was black and white tiles on this floor the floor was hundreds of years old. And I don't know what prompted me, but I looked directly upwards, and it was a huge domed ceiling way up above me with stained glass. And directly above me in the stained glass was the star again. It was replicated from the star on the floor. And I was standing directly underneath this star. So there was a direct line from the star right above me, going through my crown chakra, through my body to the star below me. As I looked up at the star and I realized that there was this connection, this huge surge of energy came down from above, came down from that star, came through my crown chakra, went through my whole body, through my feet to the star below that I was standing on, and then rushed back up again. And the only thing that I can liken it to is that moment when I shook hands with the Dalai Lama, a moment of total um, ecstasy. really, is divine ecstasy. I spoke to some people later who knew the Hindu religion better than me, and they said, "Oh, that what you experienced was Kundalini energy." And some Christians I spoke to said, "No, no, no, it wasn't Kundalini energy. It was the Holy Spirit. Whatever it was extraordinary." And here's the thing: I walked out of that cathedral with no pain.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's the kind of energy we're talking about.
Yeah. But as a human being, pain, no pain, with the experience in the middle, right? But as an energy being, you're allowing the energy of creation to shift your perception as the human being, which cuts off the pain. So therefore, your experience as a human being is changed from this pain to no pain. Awesome, right? I mean, absolutely amazing. These experiences that you've had are fantastic because they illustrate exactly what you say, which is that we are energy beings. This is the whole point. And again, what I'd like to pick up on is, was it Kundalini energy? Was it Holy Spirit? Well, quite frankly, I find it so frustrating that there are so many different labels for what is fundamentally a mystical or a spiritual or simply energetic experience, part of the process of being what and who we are. It happened. It was energy exchanged. The labels, different sectors of society, global religion, belief, whatever you want to say, will call it something different. And dowsers in this world would call it earth energy or angelic energy. And earth energy is a terrible, terrible label for whatever this energetic exchange is. Now, let me ask you something. Can you remember, or is there a picture somewhere of that star? And was it a 5-pointed star?
I do have pictures of it. I'll have to check.
Oh no, far more than 5. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, 8-pointed. Okay, so actually 8, number of infinity. Fantastic. Which is exactly the whole point, right? Numerically speaking, if you want to look at the symbols of that, infinity. But the 5-pointed star, I'll just finish talking about that, because that 5-pointed star, when you see if you can practice your dowsing well enough to be able to access this, because you'll find this 5-pointed star in your own home. You find it everywhere, because actually you can douse at an earth energy power center, an earth energy vortex, let's call it just an energy vortex. You can douse some of these ancient sacred symbols. They are simply found in the energy of the space in which we live, the field in which we live, right? And the reason they've become sacred is because they're connected to that whole ability to connect. And I'm sure at some point in the past, we as a species was far more connected to that than we are at the moment in this depth of physical-based objective reality. So look, the 5-pointed star basically is a reflection of the earth, the energy of the earth saying, hi, I can see you. I know you're there. And we would represent that as earth, air, fire, spirit, water, the 5 points. And if you're well out of balance, like I used to be when I'm far more than I am now, if you think I'm stressed now, I used to be incredibly stressed. And when I used to douse this shape, it would come out as this really bizarre shaped thing because it was reflecting the way that I was in these basic symbolic terms, massively out of alignment. When you're far more in alignment and balanced and in sync, it's this lovely geometric 5 points. Fantastic. And it's the earth saying, this is you. I know you're here. It's fantastic. It's awesome.
That's lovely. You see, every time I talk to you, Tim, I learn something new.
See, to me, what the pilgrim is doing is fundamentally using the kinetic energy of movement in a way that is also represented by in ceremony, right? So when somebody does a ceremony and they're doing certain movements and they're saying certain words, it's all drawing on the energy of that ceremony and how many times that ceremony has been performed in the past through blah 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 blah. So, and the kinetic energy instead of the pilgrim is working in the same way to emphasize, as well as the presence, the memory of the energy field that they're walking in, is all working. And that's, to me, that's why the pilgrim, an act of pilgrimage would be so powerful if it's conducted in that expression. And as you say, it doesn't matter whether people go and go there for a jolly, just to be sociable, because they enjoy it, and they meet up with people that they enjoy. But why not? Goodness me. But I think what's interesting from our point of view, and perhaps what helps people connect the dots in their own understanding, if anybody's watched it this far, is really what you're saying, which is it's about the intention. It's about the intent of connecting to understanding. And it might be trying to understand self, but actually it's understanding self in the bigger picture. That's what pilgrimage is about. That's what any spiritual connection is about. But fundamentally, it is a natural phenomena of us as energy beings. Now, you have a lot of understanding, and you have a good mate of yours who is really across the whole quantum aspect of creation. And do you see a lot of that reflected in the way that you experience or have experienced the spiritual revelations that you've had, the spiritual experiences that you've had? Do you see the quantum field at work in that process?
I don't really understand what the quantum field is. I went down a rabbit hole a little while ago. And this is where I love ChatGPT because it allows you to do this. You know, you can ask some existential questions of ChatGPT. It's interesting, quite interesting what comes up. I was interested in is our universe random? Is chaos the natural state of being? And of course, there's chaos theory and so forth, and the butterfly with the wings and all that sort of stuff. But it delved into ChatGPT, took me into quantum mechanics, which was really quite interesting. And essentially, what it said was that within the chaos there is order, and that there is a pattern. And I'm really quite fascinated by this whole thing of patterns. You know, and some people say, well, intuition is just pattern recognition. You know, it can be, but mystical intuition, which is the intuition that I've got four categories of intuition: survival intuition, cognitive intuition, mystical intuition, and proxy intuition.
Okay.
So survival intuition is a heightened sense of awareness. It's an intuition of the body. Cognitive intuition is based on subsumed expertise, gut feelings, based on specialist knowledge. You say, I've made an intuitive decision, but it's based on a whole lot of knowledge that you have subsumed that you're not even aware of. So if survival intuition is intuition of the body, cognitive intuition is intuition of the mind. Mystical intuition is inexplicable. It's the voice that says, don't get on that plane, and the plane crashes. Mystical intuition is intuition of the soul.
Right.
And proxy intuition is intuition that comes through another agent. It's intuition that can't get through to you personally, so it tries other ways. So in other words, it's the person who says, Tim, I don't think you should get on that plane this afternoon. I've got a bad feeling.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The plane crashes. Don't go into Twin Towers this morning. I've got a bad feeling. It's intuition that comes through somebody else. That to me is God intuition. So you've got body intuition, mind intuition, mystical intuition, God intuition. But in the end, it all comes down to energy. You know, quantum mechanics does come down to energy. It's it all comes back to that. You know, you talked about consciousness before. Does a rock have consciousness? I believe it does.
Sure.
Does the earth have consciousness? I believe it does.
Absolutely.
And coming back to this thing that you talked about before about separation, because it is all energy, it is all one. There is no separation. That transference of energy that I felt between the Dalai Lama and myself, that transference of energy that I felt from the star coming down through my crown chakra and through my energetic system and then back up again. You're absolutely right. I think I wrote a blog. I think the blog was post Religion is the Fat Burger. And basically what's happened is that religion has been packaged like a fast food. And you've got fat burgers, and you've got McDonald's, and you've got Big Whoppers, and you've got so forth. And each different religion has their own variation on the hamburger. But they're all hamburgers. And spirituality, I don't know how you can carry the analogy forward, but maybe spirituality is just the meat.
The meat, yeah, right.
And everything else are additives and variations and so forth, dressed up to make it something palatable. And each variation is appeals to that culture, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Religion being a fat burger. I remember posting that, and I had a big reaction to that.
Oh, you surprised me. Spirituality is an incredibly personal thing, isn't it? And that's why people get so upset about it. Don't you criticize me, quote unquote. But I agree. It's this is, if I may just say, I sent you a drafts of a couple of chapters of my book that I'm working on, which is really fundamentally about trying to take away all of those labels and even just help people see how the fundamental of our existence is just very, very simple. And if you start to really understand the difference between your objective reality and the subjective, then you really start to bring things. Not only do you feel more grounded in how you're processing the information that you're working with, dealing with, living with, but it also opens you up more to recognizing these intuitive insights and how subtle but significant they can be in everyday life even, right? And you start to really change the way that you see the world, and the objective reality that you experience actually diminishes because you realize how important and how strong the subjective actually is. That's what the book is about. Where I was going with this is truth, right? So your fat burger representing the religion, and that's fine. And you've broken it down into the basics of, spirit, the spiritual connection is what it is. And over the eons and different social structures have put different packaging around it, which is fine. See, even quantum physics, just for a second, this is not quite what I was going to say, but this is where I'll go. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics, quantum theory, it's a mistake that we all make to believe that science is in unity over their theories. Because you could talk to one person about quantum mechanics or quantum theory, and they will come up with one set of beliefs around what it is saying, and somebody else will come at it from a different angle. And the fundamentals, if you've got to start from the basics, you've got your materialists as scientists, and you've got your non-materialists as scientists. These guys are coming at it from the material world is fundamental, is what creates everything, and the quantum field somehow, and consciousness somehow kind of falls out the back end of this, right? The non-materialists are saying, absolutely, the fundamental is the quantum realm, and everything emanates up and out of it. And what we know and all we have to know, and don't forget, again, it's symbolic, right? Because really the truth of what we are, I am alive, the truth of that is merely creating a symbolism, creating a process that enables us to try to understand. And what we've got is the atomic structures of things creates things, and that's the experience that we have as consciousness. So the truth still remains that we are alive, but everything else that we create as stories to explain our awareness of being alive is simply that. It is a story. And so therefore the truth, when we talk at the humanistic level of, oh, you're not telling the truth, oh, you're doing that, you can have somebody that believes 100% in an aspect of their life experience that they are suffering with, and because they believe it is XYZ, It is their truth. It is their universe that they are living in and they are experiencing. And if it's a case of unwellness, then in order to change their state of unwellness to a state of well-being, they have to shift their perspective on their understanding. Now, truth is completely flexible in that, because the truth for that person is what they 100% believe. Truth in a different perspective, from a different perspective, and as a filmmaker, you completely understand the difference of moving a camera around and using a different lens makes on the perspective. The perspective changes, the truth for that person changes because of what they believe. The truth still, the fundamental truth is still they are alive, they are aware. Their experience is the story they tell themselves.
But Tim, I don't believe in truth.
This is why the only truth is, I am alive. You are
No,
alive.
but that's a falsehood.
No, it's not.
How do you know you're alive?
You're not alive I'm not saying the truth is you're alive as a human being. I'm saying the truth is you are present. There is a presence.
How do you know you're alive?
Because I am present.
Present to whom?
What I see reflected.
But how do you know I'm alive?
Because you are present in yourself, and I am a reflection of yourself.
So let's go back to quantum mechanics. We could be in a whole other universe. This could be an absolute total illusion.
It could.
You could not be alive. It is possible that you are not alive. It is possible that you are actually in multiple universes at the same time.
Alive is simply an awareness. I remove alive from the body or from any frame of reference except knowing in that moment, the moment, that there is a presence. And that awareness is only because there are these are supposedly physical objects reflecting, but they are created. So I haven't got a problem at all with multiple realities, multiple experiences of the energy that is currently being expressed as this thing called Tim Walter. Haven't got a problem with the fact that there could be a billion Tim Walters. There could be an infinite number of Tim Walters, but I'm not an exponent of the many worlds theory, which is really where you're kind of working on the quantum stuff. But it doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter. You see, that's the whole point, because it doesn't matter.
Okay, so if it doesn't matter, then truth doesn't matter.
No, because the one truth. You see, this is the thing.
I've given this a lot of thought. I, as a journalist,
Yeah.
my training, truth has been my north star as a human being. But as I grow older, and as I see the world turn, and as I see people come and go, I've come to believe that there's no such thing as truth. So I can't define truth. I aspire to truth. The only thing that I can define as truth is oneness.
Yes. And that is fundamentally, I am everything. I am part of, I am an expression of that higher energy. Certainly when I'm working with people, when I'm working as a coaching or doing the house healing, what I am aware of is that I completely disregard any of the rules of three-dimensional classical physics. That just goes out the window. Don't even go there. Because we're working fundamentally on the energy being and the presence of whatever wishes to express itself in the work that we do. So understanding that I am nothing. I mean, literally, I am made of nothing. Same as you. You are made of nothing. There is nothing here. But we are everything. And that is the truth. What you say is the oneness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say you are nothing, so that's why I say you're not alive.
Yeah. Yeah. But the consciousness, the awareness is present. It's rather like, I tell you what, I say you're nothing because we're talking about, at the 0 point field is fundamentally whirling vortices of nothing. There is no particle. The 0 point field is excited by something. Donald Hoffman, a cognitive psychologist, I always get it wrong, Donald Hoffman, you should look him up. He now talks in terms of consciousness activates the 0 point field that then creates the spirals, that then creates the atomic structure. But the point is, we are made of whirling vortices of nothing, right? So there is nothing, but we are everything, because everything is from the oneness. So how do we get onto that? Truth is simply that experience. It is that moment. I mean, Eckhart Tolle would take this apart and be, in delight over this sort of conversation, as would many philosophers, of course, as well. But how does that affect us on a fundamental level as a human being, which is on a different scale, from a different perspective, a different point of view? Point of view, filmmaker, we talk about points of view all the time. And trying to link that oneness into our daily experience, that's why I'm connecting it into the subjective awareness.
Sometimes I look at people in the street, and I do this as an exercise, and I look at them and I see their hierarchy. I see their hierarchy in a hologram above their head. Hierarchy in the term that Madame Blavatsky talks about it. It's very grounding. It's very grounding because it reminds me that we are all energy. We are all connected. Different color skin, different color, people's political attitudes, all of that. Doesn't matter. We're all trying our best. In the end, we're all trying our best. And seeing people, it's a very interesting exercise. You just stand on a street corner and you just watch people go by, and you look above the top of their heads and you see this holographic hierarchy of the various stages of ascension to oneness. And I find it a very cleansing kind of thing to do.
Can I just say that I'm not sure that everybody would understand that? I'm not sure that I've ever done that.
I hope
No,
they
well,
because I really hope they don't. I hope they go off now and read all of Madame Blavatsky and try and find out what the bloody hell I'm talking about.
yeah, well, you've got to explain what Madame Blavatsky was talking about in terms of hierarchy, because I don't recognise that. I haven't ever read any of her stuff. So, so what does that mean in the hierarchy? I mean, I kind of get the idea of the ascension through the three different levels.
It's the spiritual tree, if you like. The connection is the higher self, and it goes up through all of the various layers up to that Godhead, at the very, very top. I find it a very interesting exercise because what it does is it brings you back to this base level of the soul's journey. And this comes back to purpose. And what I do is when I look at people in the street, I see this thing, I see it in holographic form, I see them walking around with this thing above them. And like I say, it's incredibly cleansing. It really is.
Yeah.